The skyscraper of Hawthorne International pierced through the morning haze, its glass facade catching the soft blush of dawn. Inside, the building was still, except for the rhythmic sound of a mop sliding over the gleaming marble floors. Ethan Miller, the night janitor, worked quietly, the hum of fluorescent lights his only companion. His navy blue uniform was faded from years of wear, and though he was just another faceless employee to most, there was something calm and resolute about him, like a man who had weathered storms and learned to live in their aftermath. For Ethan, this building wasn't just a workplace, it was survival. The paycheck that came from these long, quiet hours kept food on the table for his 10-year-old son, Lucas, the one person who made every hardship worth enduring. Ethan's life had once looked different. Before the accident that took his wife, he had been a promising linguistics student, fluent in 5 languages and aiming to become an international interpreter. But dreams have a way of fading when reality knocks hard enough. After his wife's sudden death, he dropped everything, his studies, his ambitions, even his own sense of direction, to raise Lucas alone. Bills piled up, savings dwindled, and the only job he could find that allowed him to be home during the day was janitorial work at Hawthorne International. So, for the last 6 years, he'd polished floors, scrubbed conference tables, and emptied trash cans in a building full of people who never looked his way. That morning began like any other. Ethan pushed his cart down the corridor leading to the executive boardroom, humming softly to keep himself awake. The boardroom was his favorite place to clean, it overlooked the city skyline, and sometimes, he'd pause just long enough to watch the sunrise reflect off the glass towers. It reminded him of everything he once dreamed of being, successful, confident, part of something bigger than himself. He sighed, wringing out his mop, when the sound of hurried footsteps echoed behind him. "Mr. Chen and his delegation will be here any minute," a voice barked. Ethan froze mid-step as Victoria Hawthorne, the CEO herself, swept into the room surrounded by assistants and executives. She was the kind of woman who commanded attention effortlessly, elegant, decisive, and intimidatingly composed. Behind her came a translator, a young man fumbling with notes and murmuring phrases under his breath. Ethan's instinct told him to slip out quietly before anyone noticed him, but the CEO barely glanced his way. "Let him be," she said distractedly. "We're short on time." Ethan stayed in the corner, pretending to wipe the window frame, though his attention was drawn entirely to the conversation unfolding. The translator began to interpret Victoria's greeting into Mandarin, but his tone was hesitant, his phrasing awkward. Ethan frowned. The poor choice of words was changing the meaning completely. When the translator said, "We expect your culture," instead of, "We respect your culture," Ethan's stomach twisted. Mr. Chen, the visiting executive, raised an eyebrow in polite confusion. Ethan's heart thudded in his chest. He shouldn't speak. It wasn't his place. But the weight of the mistake, it was too big to ignore. Before he could stop himself, Ethan spoke softly but clearly. His Mandarin flowed flawlessly, his pronunciation exact, his tone respectful. The room fell utterly silent. Dozens of eyes turned toward the janitor with the mop still in his hand. The translator's face flushed crimson. Victoria straightened slowly, her sharp gaze locked on Ethan. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Mr. Chen broke into a delighted laugh and replied in Mandarin, engaging Ethan in a short, animated exchange that made everyone stare in disbelief. When the conversation ended, Victoria finally spoke. "You speak Mandarin?" Ethan nodded, setting his mop aside. "Yes, ma'am. Among others." Her brow furrowed. "Others?" "French, Spanish, German," he said quietly. "And English, of course." The room buzzed with murmurs. The janitor who had just saved an international meeting from disaster stood humbly, unsure if he had just secured his job, or lost it forever. For a long moment after Ethan spoke, the boardroom felt frozen in time. The ticking of the wall clock echoed through the silence, the only sound amid a dozen stunned faces. Victoria Hawthorne blinked, her carefully composed expression slipping just slightly as she processed what had just happened. Across the table, Mr. Chen, the visiting Chinese business leader, broke into a broad smile and said something in Mandarin, gesturing toward Ethan. Without hesitation, Ethan responded fluently, explaining the nuance that had been lost in translation and gently steering the conversation back on track. The once tense atmosphere shifted, where there had been confusion, now there was laughter, nods, and mutual respect. In the span of a few sentences, the janitor had turned what could have been a disastrous misunderstanding into a bridge of goodwill. When the conversation eased, Victoria raised a hand subtly, signaling for a short break. Her piercing blue eyes locked on Ethan. "You," she said softly but firmly. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" Ethan's heart dropped. He placed his mop carefully against the wall, his hands suddenly clammy. The translator avoided his gaze, clearly embarrassed, while several executives whispered to each other. He followed Victoria into the hallway, his footsteps echoing off the marble floors. She turned to him, her tone calm but curious. "How many languages do you speak, Mr. Miller?" he answered quickly, his voice quiet. "Ethan Miller. And 5 languages, ma'am." "5?" she repeated, surprised. "Mandarin, obviously. What else?" "French, German, Spanish, and English." Victoria tilted her head slightly, studying him. "You don't seem like the kind of man who just picked those up by chance." Ethan offered a modest smile. "No, ma'am. I was studying linguistics in university before life, changed course." For a moment, her expression softened. "Changed course?" He hesitated. "My wife passed away. I had to raise my son alone. I left school and took whatever work I could find. Cleaning paid the bills." Victoria didn't reply immediately. Instead, she glanced back at the boardroom through the glass wall where Mr. Chen and his delegation were chatting happily, unaware that a deal had just been saved by the janitor standing before her. "You realize what you did back there prevented a very expensive misunderstanding, don't you?" she said finally. Ethan shrugged gently. "I wasn't thinking about that. I just didn't want anyone to feel disrespected." A small, almost approving smile flickered across Victoria's face. "Well, Mr. Miller, you did more than that." Before he could respond, one of the assistants hurried over. "Ms. Hawthorne, they're ready to resume." She nodded, then looked back at Ethan. "You can stay," she said. "I'd like you to listen in." Quietly. Ethan blinked, unsure he'd heard her correctly. But when she returned to her seat at the head of the table, she motioned for him to stand by the wall. As the meeting continued, he listened attentively, stepping in once when a phrase was again mistranslated. This time, Victoria gave him a small nod of approval instead of surprise. By the time the delegation left, shaking hands warmly with her, the mood in the room was triumphant. As the executives began to file out, Victoria turned to Ethan again. "You handled yourself well," she said. "I'll make sure HR notes your help today." He gave a polite nod. "Thank you, ma'am. I didn't mean to interrupt earlier." "You didn't interrupt," she corrected. "You rescued the meeting." Her eyes lingered on him thoughtfully, as though she were seeing beyond the uniform and the mop. "Tell me, Mr. Miller, if life hadn't changed course, where do you think you'd be now?" Ethan looked down at his hands for a moment, then back up at her. "Maybe somewhere like this," he said with a faint smile. "But not holding a mop." Victoria studied him for a long second before nodding slowly. "I see." With that, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. But something in her demeanor told Ethan this wasn't the last time she'd called his name. That evening, back in his small apartment, Lucas ran to greet him the second he opened the door. "Hey, Dad. How was work?" the boy asked, eyes wide with excitement. Ethan chuckled, kneeling down to hug him. "You know, buddy," he said, ruffling his son's hair, "I think your old man might have surprised a few people today." Lucas grinned. "Did you get in trouble again?" Ethan laughed softly. Not this time. But as he tucked his son into bed that night, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life, quiet, ordinary, and predictable, had just shifted in a way he didn't yet understand. The next morning dawned gray and cold, and Ethan Miller awoke before the alarm as he always did. The coffee machine sputtered weakly in his small kitchen while Lucas, still half asleep, shuffled in wearing his oversized school sweatshirt. Ethan smiled faintly and poured him a cup of hot chocolate. It was their ritual before school, quiet mornings, cheap breakfasts, and gentle laughter before the long day ahead. Yet, beneath his calm routine, his mind kept replaying the previous day's events in the boardroom. The sound of Victoria Hawthorne's voice, the shocked expressions, and the disbelief that had followed his words, it all felt like something out of a dream. He wondered if she'd even remember him today or if, to her, he was just another forgettable employee who happened to speak up at the right time. When Ethan arrived at Hawthorne International, the day seemed ordinary enough, until he opened his locker. Inside was an envelope with the company seal, his name written in elegant cursive across the front. His heart skipped. For a second, he feared he was being reprimanded. Hands trembling, he tore it open and found a single typed note. Please report to the 50th floor at 9 a.m., V. Hawthorne. Ethan blinked at the paper. The 50th floor was the CEO's domain, off-limits to janitorial staff. No one he worked with had ever even been up there. His supervisor raised an eyebrow when Ethan showed him the note but nodded hesitantly. You'd better go, Miller. The boss doesn't ask twice. By the time Ethan stepped out of the elevator, his palms were slick with nervous sweat. The 50th floor felt like another world, carpets soft as clouds, walls lined with modern art, and glass walls revealing a breathtaking city view. Victoria's assistant, a brisk woman in her 30s, ushered him in without a word. The CEO sat behind a sleek oak desk, papers neatly stacked beside a vase of white lilies. She looked up and smiled, not the polite, distant kind he'd seen her use in meetings, but something genuine. Good morning, Mr. Miller, she said. Please, have a seat. Ethan perched on the edge of the chair, uncertain. Ma'am, if this is about yesterday, I truly didn't mean to. Victoria lifted a hand, stopping him. You saved us from losing one of our biggest international clients. I owe you a thank you, not a warning. She leaned back, studying him carefully. After the meeting, I did a little research. You studied linguistics at Stanford before withdrawing. You were on track for an international translation fellowship, weren't you? Ethan felt his chest tighten. He hadn't expected her to know that. Yes, ma'am. But my wife passed away before I could finish. My son was 5. I had to make choices. Victoria's expression softened. That must have been hard. It was, he admitted quietly. But I'd do it again. Lucas needed me more than I needed a degree. There was a pause before she opened a folder and slid it across the table. Mr. Miller, you're wasting your potential with a mop in your hand. I'd like to offer you a new position, **** assistant translator and language consultant ****. Ethan blinked. Ma'am, I don't understand. The pay is $85,000 a year, she continued, her tone steady. You'll work with our international clients, assist in translation meetings, and help train our team in cultural communication. You've proven your skill and integrity. I'd like to see what you can do with opportunity, not just survival. He stared at her, unable to speak. The words blurred together in his mind. $85,000. A stable job. A future beyond late-night cleaning shifts. For years, he had buried his talent beneath exhaustion and grief, convincing himself those dreams were gone forever. Now, someone had just handed them back. Ma'am, he whispered, voice trembling, I don't know what to say. Say you'll take it, Victoria said simply. You've earned this, Ethan. When he finally stepped out of her office, his knees felt weak, his eyes wet. He took the elevator down in silence, gripping the contract in his hand. That night, when he walked through the apartment door, Lucas ran to him, waving his homework proudly. "Dad, guess what? I got an A in English." Ethan knelt, pulling his son into his arms. "That's amazing, buddy," he said softly. "And guess what? Your dad got an A in life today." Lucas laughed, confused. "Does that mean we can get real pizza tonight?" Ethan smiled through tears. "Yeah," he whispered. "Real pizza. And maybe, a new beginning." A year later, the grand auditorium of Hawthorne International was alive with energy. Rows of suited employees filled the space, their chatter echoing beneath the shimmering chandeliers. Banners hung across the stage that read Annual Global Partnership Conference. Cameras flashed, music played softly, and the room buzzed with the anticipation of new deals, announcements, and speeches. But in the midst of all the grandeur stood Ethan Miller, once the janitor who swept these same halls in silence, now dressed in a crisp navy suit, his company badge reading, assistant translator and language consultant. As he adjusted the microphone on the stage, his heart pounded in his chest. A year ago, he couldn't have imagined standing here, addressing the very people who used to walk past him without a glance. He took a deep breath and scanned the crowd. In the front row sat Victoria Hawthorne, the CEO who had changed his life with one act of belief. Beside her was Mr. Chen, the same international client whose meeting Ethan had once saved. They both smiled warmly, giving him the silent encouragement he needed. Ethan's voice trembled slightly as he began, "A little over a year ago, I was cleaning this very boardroom. I came in before sunrise and left long after everyone else had gone home. I thought I was invisible. To most people, I probably was. I didn't think my voice would ever matter again." He paused, his gaze softening as memories flickered behind his eyes. "But one day, I spoke up, not to be seen, but to stop a mistake. And that single moment changed my life." The audience grew quiet, completely drawn in. Ethan continued, "When I lost my wife, I lost more than the woman I loved, I lost direction. I dropped out of school, gave up my dreams, and told myself that working quietly was enough. But that wasn't true. Sometimes, life forces us to pause, not to end the story, but to give us time to grow stronger for the next chapter." He smiled faintly, his voice gaining strength. "That day in the boardroom, I didn't plan to speak. But sometimes, courage isn't loud. Sometimes, it's just doing the right thing when no one expects you to." He looked toward Victoria, who gave a proud nod, and then toward Mr. Chen, who gave a small thumbs up. "This company gave me something I thought I'd lost, hope. I used to clean these floors," Ethan said, glancing at the polished marble beneath him, "and now, I help bridge languages and cultures between our clients. It's not just a job, it's a reminder that we all have value, no matter where we start. Potential doesn't fade, it just waits to be seen." The room erupted in applause, and Ethan felt his throat tighten. He wasn't a natural speaker, but this moment was bigger than nerves. It was about his journey, from loss to rediscovery, from invisibility to impact. When the applause quieted, Victoria rose from her seat and joined him on stage. "Ethan's story is proof," she said, her voice firm but warm, "that talent can come from anywhere. Sometimes, the brightest minds aren't the ones sitting at the table, they're the ones cleaning it. All they need is a chance." Ethan smiled, humbled, as she placed a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you, Miss Hawthorne," he said softly. "For seeing something in me when I couldn't see it myself." That evening, as the conference ended and the crowd dispersed, Ethan walked outside into the golden light of sunset. He loosened his tie and stood for a moment on the same sidewalk where he used to wait for the night bus after his janitor shifts. His phone buzzed, a message from Lucas, "Dad. I watched your speech online. You were amazing. I'm so proud of you. Ethan's heart swelled as he typed back, "Thank you, buddy. Everything I do is for you." Asterisk he looked up at the towering glass building that had once symbolized everything out of reach. Now, it was a place where he belonged. The city glowed around him, and for the first time in years, he felt completely at peace. He whispered to himself, dreams don't die, they just wait for the right moment to be heard. As the evening wind brushed against his face, Ethan smiled and walked toward home, knowing that both he and his son had stepped into a future brighter than either of them had ever dared to imagine.